Gospel according to Mark.
Glory to you, O Lord.
As Jesus came out of the temple, one of the disciples said to him, "Look, teacher, what large stones and what large buildings." Then Jesus asked them, "Do you see these great buildings? Not one stone will be left here upon another. All will be thrown down." When he was sitting on the Mount of Olives opposite the temple, Peter, James, John, and Andrew asked him privately, "Tell us, when will this be? And what will be the sign that all these things are about to be accomplished?" Then Jesus began to say to them, "Beware that no one leads you astray. Many will come in my name and say, 'I am he,' and they will lead many astray. When you hear of wars and rumors of wars, do not be alarmed. This must take place, but the end is still to come. For nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. There will be earthquakes in various places. There will be famines. This is but the beginning of the birth pangs." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
What large stones and what big buildings. This is something that I said to myself about 15 years ago when I was in Cambodia. I had gone there to finalize the adoption of my daughter, and we took a trip up to Siem Reap and we went to Angkor Wat. I don't know if you know, but Angkor Wat is the world's largest religious temple in the world. And as I stood there looking at this building, I just thought, what big stones and what a magnificent building. And what was really more impressive is the area where the temple is built is completely flat. And the stones were actually brought in by elephants from miles and miles away. And it was built thousands of years ago, before there was machinery that could lift the material, lift the equipment and build a temple. And I thought, wow, it was incredible. And I'm sure I'm going to have that feeling again in 2 months when Colleen and I go to Israel, and part of the trip will be to go to the Wailing Wall. And I'll be standing just where the disciples were at that temple and look and say, what big stones, what an amazing building this must have been. And then I stopped as I was preparing and looking at this, and I thought, wait a second. The Gospel of Mark was mostly shared by word of mouth, done by performance style, and an oratory telling of the story of the gospel and life of Jesus. So what we have for ourselves today written down didn't exist when the disciples were telling the story. So a little insight is what seems like predictive gloom and doom of what's about to happen with destruction. They already knew that. It had already happened. So they were reflecting back and reliving what they experienced in the presence of Jesus. And that kind of gives me a little bit of comfort because I love the Gospel of Mark. It's the one gospel where Jesus is so human, so real, so like us in so many ways, but yet so much more knowledge than we are. And the disciples, well, I kind of feel good because, as we call in seminary, we call them the disciples. They just don't get it. How many times do you read Mark and you're thinking and you're watching and saying to yourself, don't you get it? Like, it's not that hard. Why don't you understand? And I think that's the beauty of Mark, because we actually feel like we know what's going on. We have insight. So how come you don't get this? And you ask such silly questions. And it made me realize that here they are talking about the temple. They come walking out of the temple, and the disciple stops and says, as he looks back, look at these big stones. And I thought to myself, dude, you were just in the building. You were just in the temple. Last week we heard the story about the woman and the 2 coins. So didn't you notice when you were inside? And obviously they didn't, because it was only Jesus who noticed the woman with the 2 coins. So they're really clueless. They're very oblivious. And I think that's a good lesson for us. How often in our lives do we become oblivious or clueless and not aware of the things that are going on around us? I think some people might read that lesson and think about the gloom and doom and the destruction. And certainly, our hearts go out to the people in California who have lost their homes and their lives. And our prayers go to all of the first responders who are out there to care for those people, to try and protect things. And I feel so helpless in so many ways because other than prayer or making a donation, there's very little that I can do. But it is something. We can do prayer, we can do offering, and we realize that small things add up to big outcomes. I'm reminded of this because last Wednesday I was at an event at my seminary called The Empty Bowl. And it is a fundraising event that is done to raise money for those who are either homeless or on the verge of becoming homeless. And as you enter the building, there's one room set aside where people who have done pottery make bowls or cups, and these are all laid out on tables, and it's just a beautiful brilliance of color and styles. And as you come in, you're allowed to take one of those with you. And then you go to the other side of the facility, and there are vendors who've made soup. And so you have a soup meal for people from the community. And I had the opportunity to serve the soup because I was in between classes for the day, and I thought, okay, I'll do this for a bit. And it was a wonderful experience to speak to the people who were coming up and wanting to try the soups that I was offering, but it was also an opportunity to speak with the woman to my right who introduced herself as Jamie. And I said, so how are you associated with this organization? And she said, well, I'm a graduate of Penn. And I thought she said Penn, so I said, well, what was your major? And she said, no. I didn't go to college. I'm a graduate of the program, which is the Philadelphia Interfaith Program. And I said, oh. So well, tell me about your story. I really want to learn. Obviously, I don't know. And Jamie went on to tell me the story that she had struggled in her early 20s and found herself homeless. And for a period of time, she wasn't aware and comfortable in knowing where she was going to get her food. And it was from this program that she was able to get a meal a couple times a day. And one job that she had was as the director of the mosque, or one of the mosques in Philadelphia. And she would organize all of the programs, and she would usher people in and out throughout the day. And at the end of the evening, she would take people to the door, wish them a good night, and close the door. And as you walk away, you would think, oh, she'll go out the back door. And what Jamie was doing was finding a comfortable place within the mosque and sleeping there, because she had no place to sleep. And she's made it through with the funds, the gracious donations, the caring, the prayers, and supportive people. She now is able to care for herself, her teenage son, and her 20-year-old daughter. And she is gracious to God for being with her. And she is gracious to the generosity of people who have helped. Small things in her life have added up to big things, a big sense of comfort. And so you think, big stones of a temple, but we as Christians don't go to a temple per se. What's remarkable about the lesson in Mark is that Jesus comes out of the temple. And Jesus is our temple. Jesus offers himself for us in the sacrifice on the cross and gives himself freely for our sake, for a grace that we could never earn, for anything we could never expect. It's so freely given to us. He is our living temple. He is a living stone that gives so much to us, that is stronger than any material that we could ever build upon. And that's where our faith is grounded. in the lessons, in the stories, in the guidance and the words that we've heard in Scripture. And as we start to look towards the end of this liturgical year with Christ the King next week, before we know it, we're in Advent. And we are starting to prepare the way for Emmanuel, for Christ with us, for God dwelling with us. That faith is our stone, our confidence, our remembrance that we have a very powerful God who is always there for us, who is welcoming us and standing by us all the days of our lives. And sometimes in this crazy life we live in, it's so easy to forget that. We have a to-do list, and we just forget. Sometimes we just need a reminder. In my wallet, I have two things that I use to ground myself. I have a blue glass bead that reminds me that I am a baptized child of God. And I have an old-fashioned nail that reminds me that Jesus died on the cross for me and offered himself up for me. Today, I invite all of you, as you either come up for communion or as you leave the sanctuary today, to take a small stone from the pottery that I took from the Empty Bowl event last week. And I invite you to take that and keep it with you in your pocket, in your wallet, by your table or your bedside, wherever you do your devotion, to remind you that that small stone is a big piece of a solid foundation in the love of God that he has for all of us. And may that be a remembrance for you that small things can do amazingly, wonderfully strong, powerful things. Thank you so much for welcoming me into your sanctuary today. It's been an honor. Blessings to you today, this Thanksgiving week. May you be thankful for all the gifts that you have so abundantly received from God. Amen.
Amen.